When the college turned him away, he thought his story was over. Instead, the world picked it up, and the ending was one no one expected. The afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the quiet suburban street, gilding the sidewalks with a warm, honeyed light. It was the kind of day where everything seemed calm, where neighbors trimmed their hedges, children laughed faintly in the distance, and the hum of cicadas filled the spaces between. Yet, for 17-year-old Jordan Miller, every step he took felt heavier than the last. The straps of his backpack cut slightly into his shoulders, weighed down not by books, but by the weight of anticipation that had grown inside him for months, no, years. His pace was slower than usual. It wasn't because he was tired, but because he needed a moment to breathe, to steady the wild rhythm of his heart. In his hand, he held a single envelope, thin, too thin. The envelope was official, his name typed neatly across the front in block letters. The crest of Westbridge University, the school he had dreamed of since middle school, gleamed faintly under the sunlight. It was the place he imagined himself walking across grand quads, sitting in lecture halls that echoed with history, joining programs that promised a future brighter than anything he had dared to imagine. For him, it wasn't just a school. It was the symbol of everything he had worked toward. The late nights under the dim glow of his desk lamp, the hours tutoring younger kids to save money for application fees, the sacrifices his mother made, skipping dinners just so he could have books. And now, all of it came down to this envelope. His hands trembled as he slid his thumb under the seal. The paper crackled in a way that seemed louder than it should have, shattering the quiet hum of the street around him. Jordan's mouth felt dry, his pulse echoing in his ears. For a moment, he hesitated. He had rehearsed this moment in his mind so many times. He had pictured himself opening the letter and seeing the word congratulations. He had imagined running into his house, waving it above his head, his mother's face lighting up as tears welled in her eyes. He had thought about calling his grandmother, about texting his friends, about finally exhaling after years of holding his breath. But standing there, on the cracked pavement in front of his house, Jordan suddenly realized how fragile dreams were. They were powerful, yes, but also delicate. And in this moment, they rested on the weight of just a few words typed on a single sheet of paper. The cicadas grew louder, or maybe his heartbeat did. He tore the envelope open. The paper inside was crisp, the college crest stamped boldly at the top. He unfolded it with care, his eyes racing to find the words that would decide his future. His hands shook so much the page rattled in the breeze. "Dear Mr. Miller, we regret to inform you," the sentence stopped him cold. The letters, blurred, as if refusing to be read. His chest tightened, his breath caught in his throat. He blinked rapidly, forcing his eyes to focus. "That we are unable to offer you admission to Westbridge University at this time." His fingers clenched, crushing the edge of the letter. The world around him didn't stop. The sun still glowed. A neighbor still watered her garden across the street. A car rumbled lazily past. But for Jordan, everything froze. The rejection felt like a punch, sudden, sharp, disorienting. All the years of relentless effort, the sacrifices, the hope, collapsed into a hollow ache inside him. He stood there, shoulders heavy, staring at the words that had rewritten his future in an instant. He wanted to believe he had misread it. He wanted to flip the page, find a mistake, a correction. But there was no mistake. The letter was short, too short. No encouragement, no acknowledgement of what he had achieved. Just the polite, detached cruelty of bureaucracy. His lips parted as if to say something, but no sound came out. His throat burned. From the porch, his mother's silhouette appeared. She had been watching him through the screen door, waiting for him to come in, for him to share the moment they had both prayed for. When she saw the paper trembling in his hands, her expression softened not with surprise, but with the quiet, steady strength she always carried. Jordan turned slightly, meeting her gaze. The look in her eyes, half pride, half sorrow, was almost unbearable. He lowered his head, unable to speak. The letter slipped slightly in his grip, caught by the wind before he held it tighter against his chest. He thought about the countless essays he had written, the nights he had stayed awake until dawn reviewing formulas, the hours spent leading community projects. He thought about all the promises he had made to himself, to his mother, that he would be the one to change things for their family. And now, all of that seemed to dissolve into the hot afternoon air. He took a slow breath, trying to ground himself, but the sting was there, sharp and raw, He had faced obstacles before, but this felt different. This felt like being invisible, like no matter how hard he had pushed, how far he had come, someone had decided it wasn't enough. Jordan stood still in the golden light, the envelope limp in his hand. The street was quiet, but inside his chest, a storm began to stir. This moment, this letter wasn't the end. He didn't know it yet, but it was the beginning of something he could never have predicted. "We regret to inform you," the words echoed in Jordan's mind long after his eyes had left the page. They rang louder than the cicadas in the trees, louder than the car passing lazily down the street, louder than his own pounding heartbeat. He had read them once, twice, 3 times, but they refused to change. No matter how desperately he wanted to twist the letters into something else. "Congratulations. We are pleased to offer you." They remained fixed, final, merciless. The sunlight that had once painted the sidewalk in warm gold now felt cruel, exposing him in his disappointment. His fingers tightened on the paper until the edges curled. His throat felt as though it had closed around the words he could not bring himself to say. Behind him, the screen door creaked softly. His mother stood framed in the doorway, her apron still dusted with flour. She had been waiting, hopeful, ready to hear her son announce the dream they had both carried. But now her gaze fell on the way his shoulders sagged, the way the letter trembled in his grip. Her face carried no shock, only the quiet sadness of a woman who had learned to live with disappointment but never let it define her. Her eyes were deep with understanding, yet strong, refusing to show the tears that threatened to form. She knew how much this moment meant to him. She knew how many nights he had studied until his eyes burned. She had seen the notebooks filled with formulas, the essays marked with teachers' praise, the scholarships he had applied for, one after another, chasing a future larger than the world they lived in. Jordan could not meet her gaze. It was easier to stare at the letter, to let its sharp, sterile language wound him again and again than to face the silent weight of her compassion. Invisible, that was how he felt, as if everything he had done, every sacrifice, every victory, hard-won, had dissolved into nothing the moment some admissions officer glanced at his application and slid it into the rejection pile. His 4.0 GPA, his role as captain of the debate team, his hours mentoring middle schoolers in the community, all of it erased with a single sentence. "We regret to inform you." He wanted to scream, to demand why, to know what invisible barrier stood between him and the dream he had earned. But the letter offered no explanation, no comfort, only the vague, hollow reasoning, limited space and priorities. Priorities. The word clung to him like a shadow. Whose priorities? What priorities? Was it his fault that he didn't fit into the neat box they had drawn for their ideal student? He thought of classmates whose parents had ties to Westbridge, whose names carried weight, whose families never had to wonder if tuition would crush them. He thought of the brochures he had pored over, smiling students lounging on the green lawns, diverse faces scattered across the pages like decorations rather than truths. And now, he wondered if his face had ever truly belonged in that picture. The anger began to seep in, curling beneath the disappointment. He had done everything right, hadn't he? He had carried himself with discipline, with grit. He had pushed harder than anyone around him because he knew he didn't have the privilege of failing. And still it wasn't enough. His chest tightened. With frustration, a heat rising that burned at the back of his throat, he imagined the faceless committee in some air-conditioned office, flipping through applications as if they were disposable. Did they see him as just another name, another statistic, another black student who could be dismissed without a second thought? From the doorway, his mother stepped forward, the boards of the porch creaking beneath her weight. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence was steady, grounding. She had carried her own share of rejection, of doors closed before they even opened. She knew what injustice looked like, even when it was wrapped in polite language. Finally, Jordan looked up, meeting her eyes. There was no judgment in them, no disappointment directed at him, only love, fierce and unshakable, and a sadness that mirrored his own. For a moment, that look undid him more than the letter had. His throat trembled, but the words refused to form. He could only shake his head, the paper crumpling slightly in his fist. She reached out and laid a hand on his shoulder. Her palm was warm, steadying him when the ground beneath his feet felt unstable. "It doesn't mean you're not enough," she said softly, as though she could hear the words climb through his mind. But Jordan couldn't answer. Not yet. He turned away slightly, staring at the yard, the sunlight, The ordinary world that carried on as if his whole future hadn't just been rewritten. He felt small in that moment, smaller than he had in years. Overlooked, dismissed, unseen. It wasn't just about the rejection letter. It was about what it implied, that all his striving hadn't mattered, that no matter how far he had come, the world could still look at him and decide not enough. The frustration swelled again, pressing against his ribs, demanding release, but he swallowed it back. Instead, he let the silence stretch, heavy and suffocating. Inside, the kitchen timer dinged faintly. Forgotten bread now baked. The ordinary sound clashed with the extraordinary weight of what had just happened. Life moved on, as it always did, even when dreams collapsed. Jordan closed his eyes briefly, steadying his breath. The paper in his hand felt heavier than stone, though it was only a single sheet. He wanted to rip it, to throw it away, to erase the sting of those words. But some part of him clung to it, unwilling to let it go, as if discarding it would mean admitting defeat. For now, he stood frozen between his mother's quiet strength and his own raging disappointment, caught in the stillness of an afternoon that suddenly felt unbearably long. He didn't know it then, but the sting of rejection was not the final word. It was only the beginning of something far greater. Jordan sat at the kitchen table that evening, the rejection letter smoothed out in front of him. The corners had been bent from where his grip had tightened earlier, but the words were still there, crisp and unwavering. He read them again, as if staring at the page long enough might unlock some hidden code, some explanation that made sense. We regret to inform you that we are unable to offer you admission to Westbridge University at this time, due to limited space and institutional priorities. His eyes lingered on those final words, limited space and priorities. It felt less like a reason and more like a carefully chosen shield, vague enough to end any challenge, yet sharp enough to wound. He whispered the words under his breath, tasting their hollowness. Priorities? Whose priorities? What kind? The table was covered with the signs of a long day, his mother's half-empty teacup, the faint smell of bread that had cooled hours earlier, his own notebook stacked neatly by the edge. On top of the pile was his resume pages of everything he had worked for. Honors roll every year, captain of the debate team, president of the community service club, dozens of volunteer hours logged at the community center tutoring middle school kids who reminded him of himself, recommendation letters written by teachers who had insisted he was the most determined student they had taught in decades. He had the grades, he had the leadership roles, he had the endorsements. By every measure, he had earned his place. So why did this rejection feel so inevitable, so final? Jordan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. His chest still felt tight, a storm brewing inside him. It didn't make sense, not logically, not statistically. He had applied to 5 universities, for had already said yes. Westbridge was the only one that had shut the door, the one he had wanted most. He picked up the letter again, his eyes scanning the words slowly, carefully, as though the truth might be hidden between the lines. Limited space and institutional priorities. It struck him as deliberate, not just rejection, but a message dressed in politeness, telling him something he wasn't supposed to question. He imagined the admissions office a panel of professionals, his application resting in a pile among thousands. Did they see his name, his photo, his story, and decide he wasn't part of their priorities? The suspicion was faint at first, a shadow in the corner of his mind. But the longer he thought, the larger it grew. His mother had taken a seat across from him, quiet, folding laundry while sneaking glances at her son. She didn't speak, but her silence said what words couldn't. She understood the weight he carried. Finally, Jordan broke the silence. "Mom, I don't get it." His voice cracked, more from frustration than sadness. "I did everything they said we had to do, and it wasn't enough." Why? She paused, folding the shirt slowly, her hands deliberate. "Sometimes," she said gently, "it's not about what you've done. It's about what they choose to see." Her words landed heavily. What they choose to see? He thought of the glossy brochures again, filled with bright faces smiling under oak trees. Westbridge boasted about diversity in its marketing, but how much of it was real? Did they want him as a statistic, or not at all? Was he seen as a candidate or as a complication? His jaw tightened. The thought dug deeper. Maybe it wasn't about merit. Maybe it was about something else entirely. Something no essay, no grade, no recommendation could outweigh. He pictured his classmates, some who hadn't worked half as hard but carried last names tied to wealth, donations, influence. Students who had parents with alumni ties, whose college acceptance letters were almost guarantees before they even applied. He had watched them casually mention their applications, unconcerned, confident, as though the future were already theirs. And here he was, with the word regret burned into his memory. It wasn't just rejection, it was dismissal. He pressed his fingers against the letter, his nails digging slightly into the paper. The phrase echoed again, louder now, almost mocking him. Limited space and priorities. He thought about the hours he had walked home in the dark after staying late at school. The way his teachers praised his essays as graduate-level work. The pride in his mother's eyes when he earned yet another award. Was all of that invisible to Westbridge, or did they simply choose not to see it? The question grew heavier. Was it me they didn't want, or what I represent? Jordan swallowed hard, fighting back the frustration rising like fire in his chest. It was easier to believe the process was random, that there were simply too many good applicants. But deep down, he couldn't shake the sense that the rejection had less to do with his abilities and more to do with how the world measured worth. He looked up at his mother. Her expression was calm, but weary, a quiet strength in the face of injustice she had seen too many times before. She didn't need to say the words. He could read it in her silence. She understood his suspicion because she had lived it. The house was quiet except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Each second stretched longer than it should, as though time itself were waiting for him to face the truth he didn't want to acknowledge. For the first time, Jordan wondered if Westbridge had never been meant for him, not because he wasn't capable, but because their priorities didn't include someone like him. That thought sat heavy in his chest, both painful and clarifying. The rejection still hurt, but now it burned with something sharper. Suspicion. And suspicion, unlike disappointment, didn't fade. It demanded answers. It demanded action. Jordan folded the letter neatly, pressing its creases until it looked untouched. He slid it back into the thin envelope, staring at the crest of Westbridge University as though it were a mask hiding something he couldn't yet name. He didn't know what he would do next, but he knew one thing for certain. The story wasn't over. Not yet. That night, the rejection letter still sat on Jordan's desk, its edges worn from being folded and unfolded too many times. The house was quiet. His mother had gone to bed early, though Jordan suspected she wasn't asleep. He could picture her lying awake, staring at the ceiling, holding her own silent prayers for her son's future. Jordan sat in the dim glow of his desk lamp, shoulders hunched, his laptop open before him. The screen cast a pale light across his tired face. He had spent hours wrestling with his thoughts, trying to shake the words from the letter, but they clung stubbornly. Limited space and priorities. He could feel the ache of disappointment still lodged deep in his chest, but beneath it, something else had begun to stir, a restless energy, an urge not to stay silent. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. What could he even say? Complaining about rejection felt small, almost petty, but this wasn't just about him. It was about everything. That letter represented the years of effort dismissed, the suspicion that worth wasn't being measured fairly, the quiet truth that too many others knew but rarely voiced. Jordan took a breath. Then, slowly, he began to type. He didn't write with anger, though anger was there, simmering. Instead, he wrote with honesty. He told his story, tracing the journey from long nights studying under the flicker of a desk lamp to the weekends spent volunteering at the community center. He wrote about the sacrifices his mother working double shifts, the times he had skipped hanging out with friends so he could tutor kids who couldn't afford extra help. And then he described the rejection, not as a plea for pity, but as a moment of truth. He explained how it felt to pour years of himself into something, only to be told it wasn't enough. His words were raw but steady. Today, I got the letter from Westbridge. They said no. They said limited space and priorities, and for a moment, I felt invisible, but I know I'm not. I know my worth, even if they didn't see it. I got into for other schools. I'm grateful, but still it hurts. He paused, staring at the blinking cursor. Then, almost without thinking, he reached for the stack of envelopes, piled neatly on the corner of his desk. The acceptance letters, bold congratulations, welcome packets, invitations to join. He spread them out carefully, then placed the lone rejection letter on top. The contrast was stark. Hope stacked against dismissal. He snapped a photo with his phone. The image was simple, yet powerful, proof of what he had achieved, set against the one institution that had said no. With a steadying breath, Jordan attached the photo to his post. "This is what it looks like," he wrote in the caption. "For Jesus, one no, and still, the no is the one that feels heavier. But I want anyone who's been rejected, overlooked, or told they weren't enough to know you are more than a letter. Your worth doesn't shrink because someone failed." To see it, he read it twice, then hit post. For a moment, there was only silence. The hum of his laptop, the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Jordan leaned back, exhaling. Maybe no one would see it. Maybe it would drift into the endless noise of social media, unnoticed. But within minutes, the first comment appeared. Then another. Then dozens. Strangers from across the country responded. Their words filled with outrage and encouragement. "You deserve better. This broke my heart to read. Westbridge should be ashamed." His phone buzzed relentlessly. Notifications lit up one after another, too fast to keep up with. Friends shared the post. Teachers left comments, praising him not only for his achievements, but for his courage to speak out. Neighbors chimed in, recalling the times they had seen him helping their children, cutting grass for the elderly, organizing community events. And then came something Jordan had not expected: messages from alumni of Westbridge University itself. Some expressed pride in him. Others expressed disappointment in their alma mater. One wrote, "This isn't the first time I've heard stories like this, but it needs to be the last. Thank you for speaking out." Jordan stared at the screen, stunned. The words he had typed in solitude were now being carried across hundreds, then thousands of voices. His story was no longer his alone. It had become a mirror reflecting something larger, something people recognized in their own lives. By midnight, his post had been shared thousands of times. Local journalists began messaging him. His name started appearing in hashtags. The weight of the rejection still pressed against him, but now it mingled with something new: empowerment. He had spoken, and people had listened. He had been invisible that afternoon, but tonight, he was anything but. Still, uncertainty threaded through his thoughts. Was this a good thing? Could it backfire? What would Westbridge think if they saw it? Did he even care? He glanced toward his mother's room. The door was closed, but a sliver of light still glowed beneath it. She was awake. He wondered if she, too, had seen the post, if she, too, felt the strange mix of pride and unease that now coursed through him. Jordan turned back to his laptop. Comment after comment scrolled past. A flood of voices reminded him that rejection did not define him, that perhaps, by sharing his story, he had given courage to someone else carrying their own quiet hurt. He didn't know where this would lead. The uncertainty lingered, heavy and real, but for the first time since the envelope arrived, he felt something stir inside him that was stronger than disappointment. Hope. The morning after his post went viral, Jordan woke to the sharp buzz of his phone vibrating against the nightstand. For a moment, still tangled in the haze of sleep, he thought it was just more notifications, but as the screen lit up, he saw a number he didn't recognize, an area code tied to Westbridge's city. His heart stuttered. He let it ring once, twice, then, with hesitant fingers, he swiped to answer. "Hello?" His voice was hoarse, uncertain. A pause, then a voice, professional yet strangely warm, filled his ear. "Good morning, Mr. Miller. This is the Office of Admissions at Westbridge University. Am I speaking with Jordan Miller?" Jordan sat up. Instantly, the sheets pulling around his waist. His pulse surged, and for a moment, words caught in his throat. "Yes," he managed. "This is Jordan," the caller continued, their tone careful, almost rehearsed. "We wanted to reach out personally regarding your application. We reviewed your file again. After further consideration, we are pleased to extend to you an offer of admission along with a full scholarship package." Silence. The words hung in the air like they didn't belong to reality. Jordan blinked, his mind struggling to catch up. Just yesterday, they had dismissed him with a polite rejection. Today, they were not only offering admission, but a full ride. The representative cleared their throat. "We understand this is unexpected, but after recent developments, the committee felt it was important to revisit your application. We sincerely hope you'll consider Westbridge." Jordan's grip tightened on the phone. Recent developments, the phrase made his stomach twist. They meant the post, the shares, the outrage, the attention. He mumbled a polite response, thanked them, and ended the call as quickly as he could. Then he sat in silence, the phone still in his hand, staring at the morning light filtering through his blinds. For months, he had dreamed of hearing those words, admitted scholarship, welcome to Westbridge, but now, hearing them brought not only relief, but confusion and something darker. Why now? He walked into the kitchen. Still in disbelief, his mother was at the stove, frying eggs, the smell of butter filling the room. She turned when she heard him and immediately noticed the dazed expression on his face. "Jordan," she asked softly, "what is it?" He pulled out a chair, sat down, and told her. Every word felt heavy. Her eyes widened, her spatula frozen midair. They changed their mind. She asked, incredulous. "Yeah," Jordan said, his voice flat. "Full scholarship, just like that." A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the faint sizzle from the pan. His mother set the spatula down and sat across from him. "Baby, that's what you wanted, isn't it?" Jordan's jaw tightened. He wanted to smile, to celebrate. He wanted to feel that rush of victory, but instead, he shook his head slightly. "It doesn't feel real. It doesn't feel earned." His mother tilted her head, her eyes filled with both pride and concern. "Of course it's earned. You worked harder than anyone I know." "But they didn't see that," Jordan replied, frustration seeping into his tone. Not until thousands of people online told them they were wrong. Not until it became a problem for them. The words came out sharper than he intended, but they were true. He thought back to the rejection letter, the cold finality of it. Nothing about him had changed overnight. The only difference was visibility. People had seen him, rallied for him, reminded the university of what they should have recognized from the beginning. So why did the offer feel less like opportunity and more like damage control? He pressed his palms together, resting his forehead against them. Do I even want to go there now? To a school that only wants me because the internet told them to? His mother reached across the table, placing her hand gently over his. Her touch was steady, grounding. You need to ask yourself what matters more, the place or the chance. Sometimes doors open for the wrong reasons, but what you do once you step through, that's what defines you. Jordan lifted his head, her words sinking in. That afternoon, the calls continued. Reporters wanted statements. Former students reached out, praising him, urging him to accept. Even classmates messaged him, astonished at how quickly everything had shifted. His post had ignited a fire, and now he stood in the center of it. Yet with every ping of his phone, his uncertainty deepened. Was this victory truly his? Or was it borrowed from the voices of strangers who had amplified his story? He wandered out to the porch, watching the late afternoon sun dip low, painting the sky in streaks of amber and rose. The air was warm, heavy, and for the first time since the rejection letter arrived, he let himself breathe deeply. He thought of his younger self, the boy who had dreamed of Westbridge, who had studied long after the world went quiet. That boy would have been overjoyed at this offer. But Jordan, standing here now, had seen too much to accept it blindly. Still, he knew one truth. Opportunity, however it came, was still opportunity. If he stepped onto that campus, he wouldn't just be another student. He would be proof living, undeniable proof that no rejection, no dismissal, no shadow of invisibility could erase his worth. Inside, his phone buzzed again. Another message, another reminder of the storm he had stirred. He let it buzz for now. He stayed on the porch, watching the horizon darken. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the layers of doubt and frustration, a spark of pride glowed. They had tried to shut the door on him, but now that door stood wide open, and the choice of stepping through or not was his alone. The weeks that followed were a blur of decision-making, interviews, and endless conversations. Every day, Jordan felt the weight of the choice pressing on him. Should he accept the scholarship? Or should he walk away from a university that had once dismissed him? His mother never pushed, never insisted. She simply reminded him of what he had always known. Baby, opportunity isn't about who offers it. It's about what you make of it once it's yours. In the end, Jordan said yes, not for Westbridge, not for the institution that had failed to recognize him until the world demanded it. He accepted for himself and for his family, for the chance to step into a future where he could do more, be more, and prove that his worth was not theirs to measure. The day he arrived on campus, the sky was painted in late summer hues. Streaks of orange and pink stretched across the horizon. The air was alive with the buzz of students hauling suitcases, parents giving last-minute advice, and the faint toll of the clock tower bell echoing across the green lawns. Jordan walked slowly, taking it all in. His backpack was slung across one shoulder, but this time it didn't feel heavy. The weight he carried now was a burden. It was purpose. The buildings of Westbridge rose around him, their stone walls glowing golden in the light of the setting sun. For years, he had pictured this place only in his imagination. Now, it was real beneath his feet. Yet he walked not as the boy who once longed for approval, but as a young man who understood something deeper, that being here was not validation of his worth. It was simply the next step in a journey that had begun long before. As he crossed the quad, he could feel eyes on him. Some students whispered, recognizing him from the story that had swept through the internet. Others didn't know his face, but felt the ripple of his presence. He didn't shy away. His head was held high, his stride steady, every step a silent declaration, I belong, whether you see it or not. He paused near the center of campus, where the sunlight spilled in wide bands across the grass. He stood there for a moment, letting the warmth of it touch his face. The golden light wrapped around him like an embrace, soft yet powerful, illuminating him against the backdrop of a university that had once tried to close its doors. And in that moment, Jordan understood. He wasn't walking for Westbridge's approval. He was walking for every rejection he had ever faced, for every person who had been told they weren't enough, for every student who would one day read his story and find the courage to keep going. A memory flickered. His mother standing in the doorway the day he opened the rejection letter, her face carrying strength and sorrow. Now, he wished she could see him here in this exact instant, not broken, not invisible, but radiant, walking into a future shaped not by Westbridge's mercy, but by his own resilience. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Another notification, another comment on the post that had changed everything. He didn't even look. The validation wasn't in the likes, or the shares, or the sudden attention of strangers. The validation was in the fact that he had endured, that he had kept shining even when doors slammed in his face. As the sun dipped lower, Jordan climbed the steps of the library, the symbol of knowledge and promise he had once dreamed of. He paused at the top, turned slightly, and let his gaze sweep across the campus glowing in twilight. The voice of the narrator lingered in the silence. Sometimes the world won't see your worth until others remind them. But true value doesn't come from their approval. It comes from the persistence to keep shining. Even when doors slammed shut, the camera of life pulled back, framing him against the sunset. One student among thousands, yet undeniably singular. A young black man who had been told no, who had been overlooked, who had been rejected, yet who stood here now, not as someone who was given a place, but as someone who had taken it and transformed it into something greater. The moral of his story was clear, though it didn't need to be spoken aloud. Perseverance, self-worth, and the power of community could turn injustice into opportunity. Jordan adjusted the strap of his backpack, the fading sunlight catching his profile. Then, with quiet certainty, he walked forward into the library, into the evening, into his future, and for the first time in weeks, he didn't think about the rejection letter. He thought only of the path ahead.